Welcome back to the Vaxa Bureau Intelligence Optimised podcast. At Vaxa Bureau, we exist to provide leaders with credible information, communities of practice, and secure products that help them be ready for today and prepared for tomorrow. We believe the future of leadership lies in coactive intelligence, blending open source, human insights, and secure data to give those who lead an edge in an increasingly volatile world. Recently, I had the privilege of attending the Australian AgInvestment Sustainability Summit in Brisbane, which was hosted by Centuria, Bentleys and K&L Gates. The event drew 450 leaders from across agriculture, finance and government, including some industry legends like Bill Gunn, Richard Hare and more. It highlighted agriculture's critical role not just as a driver of food production, but as a foundation for investment, sustainability and national security. It was one of those events where you can feel the weight of the moment. Over 450 leaders from across ag, investment, government and industry, all in the same room. And the conversation wasn't just about farming practices or balance sheets. It was about resilience, security, and Australia's future place in the region. And for me, it was also a moment of connection. Many of the themes we've been talking about on this podcast, natural capital, phosphate, sovereign supply chains, they were all front and centre in the discussions. It felt like our conversations here were walking straight into the mainstream. So today, I want to take you inside some of those themes, not as a conference recap. You don't need a transcript of every panel, but as a conversation about what matters. The challenges, yes. The opportunities, definitely. And most importantly, how leaders like you can be ready for today and prepared for tomorrow. Let's start with something that really stood out. Agriculture being talked about in the same breath as national security. Now, if you work in food and agribusiness every day, that may not sound surprising, but in the broader national conversation, agriculture has often been framed as an industry issue, something about exports or droughts or supermarket prices. At the summit, it was framed very differently. Agriculture was described as a sovereign capability. And when you stop to think about it, it makes perfect sense. No food security, no national security, simple as that. But here's where it gets really interesting. Australia's food systems are exposed. We're vulnerable to climate volatility, logistics bottlenecks, global competition for resources. These vulnerabilities aren't just business risks, but they're potential weak points that our adversaries could exploit. So what's the opportunity here? Well, when agriculture is recognised as part of the security agenda, the level of attention, the level of investment changes. It stops being just about helping farmers through a tough season and becomes about national resilience, regional stability, and even diplomacy. And that's where Vaxa Bureau's intelligence work matters. We bring together the hard data, shipping routes, weather models, commodity flows, with the human insights, that human intelligence, people having conversations on the ground with producers, investors, policymakers. That synthesis gives leaders a real-time, actionable picture of agricultural intelligence. And that's what helps leaders make better calls. As you're listening, think about your own organisation. Do you treat agriculture as a strategic pillar of security or just as an industry sector? That mindset shift is where resilience begins. Another theme that kept surfacing was natural capital. Soil, water, biodiversity. You've heard it on this podcast before, Dr. Tony O'Grady from CSIRO. The value of ecosystems is now firmly in the investment spotlight and starting to appear on companies' balance sheets. Investors aren't waiting around. They're already moving capital into projects that demonstrate measurable environmental and social outcomes. What they want is credibility. That's the challenge. How do you prove that carbon is actually stored in the soil? How do you show biodiversity gains that aren't just tick box exercises? This is where the tension lies. On one hand, there's huge opportunity for agriculture to unlock new revenue streams, attract fresh investment and build consumer trust. On the other hand, the sector's wrestling with the tools, the metrics and the standards to do it properly. And that's where the intelligence comes in again. At Vaxa Bureau, we track how policy is shifting in Canberra, in Washington, in Brussels. We monitor how investors are setting the ESG requirements. We pick up the human signals from conversations with farmers, trialling carbon projects, to exporters trying to meet new sustainability criteria in Asian markets. Where you stitch those sources together, you start to see not just where the risk is, but where first movers are getting traction. And that's the edge leaders need if they want to be prepared for tomorrow. Now let's talk about something less glossy, But it's just as critical. Fertiliser. Phosphate came up several times at the summit, and for good reason. Fertiliser doesn't often make the headlines, but it underpins global food security. And Australia is heavily dependent on imports for critical fertiliser input. That's a big vulnerability. Imagine a geopolitical disruption that cuts off access to those imports. Suddenly farmers can't grow at scale, food prices spike and resilience takes a hit. But here's the other side. Australia has domestic phosphate resources. Just look at Northwest Phosphate in northern Queensland. They've just signed an offtake deal with Adani. Projects coming online up in the north aren't just mining plays. They're national resilience projects. They could secure domestic supply, stabilise prices, and give us a strategic advantage in the Indo-Pacific. And that's where leaders need both open source intelligence and human intelligence. Open source data tells you about shipping trends, pricing, supply-demand balances. Human intel, the conversations with project developers, logistics operators, defence planners, the taxi driver picking up the CEO from the airport, it tells you what's really happening behind the press releases. That's the kind of intelligence picture that lets decision makers step from being reactive to being proactive. Think about the sectors you rely on. Where are your phosphate vulnerabilities? What's that one input, that one link in the chain that, if cut off, could destabilise your entire operation? The final theme I wanted to share is the human side of agriculture. Events like the summit often bring in the titans of industry, and there were plenty of those in the room. But what I loved was also seeing the intergenerational farming families, the innovators, the younger voices pushing for change. Because at the end of the day, agriculture isn't just about land or inputs or capital, it's about people. And the challenges they face are very real. Labour shortages, rural services under strain, governments imposing unfair taxes, younger generations deciding whether the family farm is still worth the grind. Those issues don't show up neatly in spreadsheets. You can't always see them in a market report. They come through in stories, community conversations, and the pulse of rural Australia. So that's why at Vaxa Bureau we value human intelligence as much as open source intelligence. Data gives you breadth, but people give you depth. When you bring those perspectives together, you get a much fuller picture of risk and opportunity. And you get close to understanding how systems actually work, not just how they look on paper. So let's connect the threads. Agriculture as national security. Natural capital as new investment frontier. Fertiliser as a strategic vulnerability and opportunity. And people, the backbone of resilience. Together they tell us that agriculture is no longer a background industry. It's a frontline capability for Australia and the region. And that means leaders can't afford to look at it with yesterday's mindset. At Vaxa Bureau, we talk a lot about being ready for today and prepared for tomorrow. Ready today means having the clarity to deal with current shocks, whether that's a supply chain disruption or a regulatory shift. Prepared for tomorrow means building the foresight and systems to handle what's coming next and what's after that, whether that's climate impacts, new investor expectations, or regional competition. And the only way to do that is with intelligence you can trust. Intelligence that brings together the open source world with the human insights to give context. That's why we exist. So that was my reflection on the summit. For me, it reinforced that agriculture isn't just about producing food, it's about resilience, investment and sovereignty. It's about leaders making better decisions today while preparing for tomorrow. If you're leading in food and agribusiness or any critical sector, and you want to sharpen your knowledge, improve your systems, and get an edge in a volatile world, that's what Vaxa Bureau is here for. Thanks for joining me for this quick snapshot on Vaxa Bureau Intelligence Optimised. And remember, be ready today and prepared for tomorrow.